Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who helped shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for this show, but if we pretended that we had sponsors for this episode, which is the first of two episodes we have with Don Estes, today's sponsor would be the St. Louis Art Museum. If you have not been to the St. Louis Art Museum, you need to roll on up the river and visit the St. Louis Art Museum. It is a stunning, stunning museum. It is, for me, the way I came to know it was that halfway point between Memphis and Iowa City. And so when I was in graduate school, I would stop there and stay with two dear friends who lived there at the time. And we would go to the St. Louis Art Museum. It has an absolutely amazing, amazing collection. It houses one of my all-time favorite pieces of art, a piece by Henry Osawa Tanner called Gateway, Tangier. It is a stunning piece of art. But in addition to this tiny little painting from Henry Osawa Tanner, they also have a ridiculously large collection of Max Beckmann paintings, which we will talk about at great length in this interview today. So, today's interview is part one of two interviews that I recorded with Don Estes. The interview that we're going to listen to today was recorded on November 1st, 2024. Enjoy the interview. And so usually the way I start is the way Krista Tippett starts that great On Being podcast where she says, tell me your earliest memory of faith. But this isn't about faith. This is about art. Okay. And so will you talk to me a little bit about how art lived in your childhood or in your home as a kid?
I guess my first memory of art being what it is was I guess I was about 6, and for Christmas, my dad gave me the John Nagy Learn to Draw kit. It had a book, and you open the book, had a covered bridge. It had all these classic John Nagy black and white pictures. It came with a little box of charcoal, a couple pencils, and a kneaded eraser, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. I still have a zillion of them. And so, it was Christmas morning. I got the thing, and I just couldn't wait to start, drawing stuff. So I remember my dad sat with me that night, and we drew the covered bridge. He drew, and I drew. We each had a pencil. We each had a piece of paper. And so that was the start of thinking this is pretty cool.
Now, was that something that your dad did?
My dad was a draftsman.
Okay.
He was an engineer, and his earliest job was drafting. So he was the kind of guy that carried a slide rule. He could tell you the cosine of some number with slipping the slide rule back and forth, as if I knew what a cosine was. And so he was that kind of guy, but he was a great draftsman, technical drawing. He didn't have a lot of art in him, but he could draw straight lines perfectly. He could draw a perfect circle with a pencil, perfect circle. It looked like something you'd use a template for. And so he was an encouragement, but I always wanted to just kind of draw, get into it and draw, smudge and erase and all that kind of stuff. So that's my earliest memory of getting started with art.
Now, was that something that you had shown interest in before?
Yeah, I was always coloring and all that kind of stuff, you know. So he decided that I was old enough to actually aim. You know.
Right. And so starting there, what kind of things were you drawing? What kind of things did you feel yourself sort of pulled towards?
Oh, everything. I drew, you know, I copied a lot of cartoons and drawings, and, you know, junior high, I started making T-shirts. You know, the what's that guy's name? Big Daddy Roth. You know?
Yeah.
And the hot rods and all that stuff. I painted T-shirts. My mom would go to J.C. Penney's and buy me a stack of T-shirts, and I'd sit down there. And when I think it was 13 or so, 14 or so, I got an airbrush and sat in the basement. And we had a basement. And my dad had a little air compressor, and I sit down there and spray paint T-shirts.
Man, that's a huge thing. So now where was this? Where is
This
it
was
that you were growing
I
up?
grew up just south of St. Louis.
Okay.
In a little suburb called Afton, Missouri.
And I can't remember. Do you have siblings?
I have a sister.
Okay. Older or younger?
Older.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was she into art at all?
No.
And then, but now tell me about this getting an airbrush compressor. That's a huge thing. I didn't know anybody with an airbrush compressor.
Well, my dad had an air compressor.
Okay.
Why, I don't know. He had a lot of tools. And he had a wood shop in the basement, and which I have all those tools now. And I told him I wanted to get an airbrush. And so we went to Tandy Leather. There was a Tandy Leather store, and they sold an airbrush. It was a little poche, however it's called, airbrush. And so I said, yeah, that's it, whatever. I didn't know what an airbrush was. It just looked like something I'd seen, you know. So he bought me that for Christmas, one Christmas. And he had the compressor. So I sat down there and just spray painted T-shirts
Now,
and then sold them at school.
and what kind of things were you putting on the T-shirts? Like you were saying, you know, Big Daddy Roth.
Mostly copies of stuff like that. There was
Right.
another. We used to go to car shows, and there was always a booth with, I think the company was called Mouse, and there would be two guys sitting there with airbrushes, you know, doing these T-shirts that they had silkscreen. The black outlines were silkscreen, so they had a stack of them, and you could pick between like 2 or 3 different designs. And they'd put the shirt on a little easel and color it in, and then, you know, airbrush whoever's name on it, you know.
Wow.
So I'd spend the whole car show time just staring at those guys. You know?
Now, was art something that was in the house? Was that something that your folks were interested in? I mean, St. Louis is such a huge place for great art.
They didn't have any real art. They had, you know, pictures of family members and stuff, but no art.
Right. And would you go to museums or see out in the world?
Go to the St. Louis Art Museum, which is one of the best.
Yeah, it's amazing. So were you going there like in high school groups or elementary or middle school groups?
I started going there once I got a driver's license at 16. I went there all the time.
No, I mean, to me, that museum is such a great place and such a huge collection of fantastic things. I'm curious, what kind of things stood out or in your brain now in terms of thinking about it?
What stands out to me now is that one year, I can't remember what year it was, they had all 3 Monet's water lilies put together. They owned one of them.
Right.
And the other one, I think one came from New York and one came from Paris, I think, or someplace. But that show just was incredible to me.
And what do you remember about it? I mean, for me, Monet is one of those great artists that is appealing to so many people, but for so many different reasons.
Right.
So I'm curious, what was it about it that drew you in?
I think that what really got me was the texture and the point where as you got closer to it, it disappeared.
Yeah.
You know, and then as you'd back up, and you'd have to back up pretty far, especially when all 3 are together, to see it's water lilies floating in the water, and it looks just like water lilies floating in the water.
Yeah, I know.
But as you walk up to it, it all disappears.
And then was that? I mean, you were doing drawing, and then you were doing some airbrushing. I mean, that is a radically different world. The paint texture, the dryness and the wetness, and all of the goodness that's happening there. Was that something that made you gear towards oil paint?
I didn't actually start painting until high school, and I was lucky because there was a woman, Mrs. Keppel. She was probably in her late 60s, teaching art, high school art, and the first thing she let me do after she realized I was really interested was let me smoke outside. I picked up the terrible habit of smoking cigarettes, and I would sneak outside, and she knew I was sneaking outside. And one day she just came out here and she goes, "You really need to stop doing that. So when you're done, put it out and come back in class." Never reported me, never said anything. And the art room had a door out to the back. And she was just great. She taught us how to do linocuts, linoleum. And so I got into that. It was my earliest get into printmaking.
Now that's again no small feat. I mean, for a school to have access to lino cuts.
Right.
Was it a big school? Was it a big program?
It wasn't a huge high school. I mean, it was, I guess, normal. I only went to one, so I don't. It was not tiny, but it wasn't huge.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the other kids in the class? Were
there was a couple others that were interested in it, and they really got interested in the lino cut stuff because the drawing skills weren't as important. It was the aim, with the knives, and some of them got pretty good. And she was just such an incredible teacher, for high school students. She really was just, she would tell me what to go look at the museum, which. No other teacher would have done that.
Now, thinking about the teacher, so you were mentioning the access to lino cuts. What were some other things that stood out about Ms. Keppel? P.S. One of the things that I've noticed and that I love about this project is that almost everyone has some story of a high school or primary or middle school art teacher, and the room and the space and how it worked. And so I'm curious, what were some other things that stuck out for you with Ms. Keppel?
Well, we had I guess every high school had like a study hall hour or something. If your schedule was filled and you've had all your requirements, you just had a study hall. So I asked her if I'd just come to the art room for study hall, She goes, "Well, do you have any tests coming up that you need to be studying?" And I'm like, "Oh, no." Yeah, sure. But so I spent a lot of extra time. I spent my whole life in high school in the art room, basically.
Yeah, me too.
As soon as I got out of English, I'd have to head over between classes. I'd stop in the art room, work on something I was working on. And that's the other thing. We all had our little space to keep stuff, which I don't know if other high schools had that or not, but it was really more like college. It's like the printmaker room was where I hung out in college, and everybody had their little spot in the wall to keep your stuff. And it was pretty much, I knew by the time I graduated there was only one thing I could do in college, and that was go to art school.
Now, what about your folks? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'd switched majors from biology to fine arts, my parents sort of wigged out for a little while. Were your folks super supportive in terms of thinking about going from high school to college with art?
They weren't excited about it, but they knew that I didn't know how to do anything else. I wasn't that good at anything else.
But now, just to back up just a little bit, so what kind of things do you remember being interesting to you in terms of making in high school? I mean, you had made that shift from the airbrush images that were sort of like the pop culture images of trucks and stuff.
Then I started drawing just real stuff, still lifes, go outside and sketch cabin or woods or whatever, And then I'd bring them in, I'd do them on the weekend, bring them into school, and she would criticize, She's like, what's this all about right here? And I said, well, I don't know, couldn't really get it right. She goes, no, it's not right. She was as good as any college art professor I had. She just didn't have the opportunity to show her knowledge except for a few people like me that were interested, It wasn't that we were that good, it was just that we were curious about it.
Now, just to backtrack a little bit more, what were some other things? Because for me, the thing about the St. Louis Art Museum that's so great is that it's free, and so there's really no barrier.
Yeah, it's always been free. I think it still is.
Yeah, and are there other things that you remembered? Monet was such a good thing, but I know that they have so many killer pieces.
Everything, they have really good stuff, and I got so used to seeing the good stuff, and they had a big. What's that guy's name? Beckman.
Oh yeah,
Beckman.
They have a massive collection of his. Because if I remember right, when he immigrated to the U.S., he taught at WashU.
I think he lived in St. Louis. That's why they had the big collection.
Right, and those are amazing.
They were strong. I looked at those a lot. I didn't really like them, but I knew they were powerful.
I love that. I feel like we could probably have like a book on people who were impacted by those Beckman paintings and how no one liked them.
But nobody would try to copy.
But you knew that they were kick-ass. Like you knew that they were doing the thing that Beckman wanted.
It's kind of one of those that you can't take your eyes off of.
Yeah, they're really powerful. And then they recently, or in the time that I've been going to the museum, a lot of times they'll either have it in that big German room, what I call the German room, or they'll have them in a little stash all by themselves, and they're really impactful.
Powerful,
And so thinking about high school, now when you were doing high school, was art a thing that was okay for kids to do, or were you kind of a weirdo?
There's about 3 of us that cared anything about it at all.
Right.
And they hung out there all the time. So.
Okay, so thinking about high school, and then what about your outside friends? What kind of things were they into?
I didn't really have any friends. I had a girlfriend in my senior year of high school that was in the art room. We hung out in the art room. That's how we got started dating.
Okay.
She was the only one, though, that really cared anything about it. I can't think of any other people in high school that gave a crap about art.
Right. Yeah, but for me, it was a small group of people, and we would sort of always be in there. And so thinking about finishing up with high school, where did you end up going to college?
To Memphis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how did you know? Obviously, it's just a raft ride down the Mississippi, but
I just knew it was Memphis, and it wasn't where I lived.
Okay.
I knew there was a music scene, and I was, I had a guitar, I played guitar. I wasn't very good at it, but I liked trying. And
now, wait, what kind of music were you playing?
Oh, just the standard rock and roll of the day. We had a little band. I was probably the worst of the musicians in the band. And but it was cool to play guitar. So.
Now, that transition from a St. Louis suburb to Memphis must have been a big one. What was the city like at the time?
Well, the first year I lived in the dorm, so I didn't really see much of the city. I didn't have a car, and everybody hitchhiked in those days, so we'd hitchhike. There was really no reason to go downtown. Overton Square was where the place was to go. There was a little bar up on Highland called Showbo's, which I think was actually started by Mongo. when he was before he was crazy, before he was Prince Mongo, and that was his bar. I'm pretty sure. I can't swear to that, but I'm pretty sure he owned it, and it was where everybody hung out. We could walk. It was on Highland, but not all the way to the Strip. It was before the Strip, but we could walk there, and college was all about the art department. That's all I cared about.
Now, what was going on in the art department then? Who was teaching there then?
My beginning drawing teacher was a guy named Daniel Ziembo. He still paints. I looked him up. I even sent him an email, which he never answered. And I'm thinking, and I said, like, you probably don't. I'm sure you don't remember. You've had a zillion past students and everything, but I wanted to just, tell you that was, looking back on it, he taught me really a lot about drawing and stuff. And he was also the printmaking teacher, the head of the printing department. And once the first semester you couldn't take printmaking. You had to take the basics. I think it was the second semester they let me in a printmaking class. I think we were supposed to be a sophomore, but I got in a second semester freshman, and I was just we hung out there. That was the hangout. The whole anybody that was cool in the art department hung out in the printmaking room. It was in the basement of Jones Hall. And it was just the spot, It was just a whole life in that printmaking room.
Now, just to backtrack a little bit, what was great about the drawing class? I'm curious. As a person who teaches drawing, I'm always wanting to be impactful. So, what were some things that were particularly helpful?
He had a knack for recognizing sort of what you were doing wrong, which most people were doing the same thing wrong. But he'd give you some individual attention, He stood over my shoulder, and for our final, we had to draw. He set up this huge still life, roses, and it was huge. It was the size of this room, basically. So everybody's sitting around it, so everybody had a little bit different view of what their still life was. And I had a huge thing of white roses facing me. And I drew those roses pretty good, and I think I got the only A on the final. But no, there was one other guy that got an A, and his drawing was completely different than mine, And so I was like, he said, "Okay, that's pretty good." I said, "You two, these two are the best." And I'm looking at the other one. I'm thinking, so now, why did that one get an A? Just so different than I would have approached it. And so he explained all these different things that I didn't really think about mark making and all this stuff. I knew it was good. I just didn't think it was as good as mine, but it was. And so he, most of the students he wouldn't really even talk to. I got to realize he was only talking to people he thought were worth talking to.
Right.
Which was flattering.
Now, what about? I know a lot of times when people make that shift from high school to college, one of the other things that's particularly exciting, revelatory, is being able to see other art, things that they hadn't seen or been exposed to before. Right. What kind of, do you remember, was it through art history, or was it just sort of being there? Were there slide presentations that were being given?
We had art history classes, courses. We sat there and looked at slide boxes to study for the test at midnight. Everybody crowd around 2-inch slides and trying to take notes. No projection or anything. During the test, they'd be projected, look completely different, And but it was before all this. There was no digital anything, and so it was, just everybody. It was just such a strong coalition of students that were going to be artists, and I think most of them became artists. And it was just they all hung out in the printmaking room. Even though they were good painters, and the painting was on the second floor, I think, and it just didn't have the vibe that the printmaking room had. The printmaking room was a hangout. It was where everybody hung out. There was anybody in the art department.
I wonder what it was. I mean, talk to me about the space, about some of the things that were going on there.
It was not a very big space, and we had a litho press. We had a pretty big etching press, and we had a small etching press. At the very back, we had the sink where you did your litho stones, ground your stones, and they had a wall of shelves with everybody had a stone with their name on it, that they were working on, and then at the other end, it was one long skinny room in the basement of Jones Hall, and the other end just had some tables where people sat and worked, and more shelves where you could store your prints and stuff that you were working on. And it wasn't very big. It was just the place to be. It was just a cool place to be.
Now, what was it? What do you think it was? I mean, you had that early exposure to lino cuts, but I wonder what it was about printmaking in general that attracted you to it.
I think there's a lot of process, and that turns off a lot of people because it's not like just grabbing a paintbrush and painting whatever you want. You got to there's rules to follow, which of course I tried not to, and sometimes successfully and most times disastrously. And especially with like litho, it's really hard to be completely just free and experimental, because it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And if you don't follow the rules, it's not going to work.
Right.
So litho is the hardest, and etching, all of it is tedious, and it's hard to be super loose and everything. It's easier to be loose with litho, but the results might be disastrous. Look great on the stone, but after you pull the paper off stone, it looks like shit. So the rules to follow are always trying to be broken, but sometimes successfully, most times not.
Now, what kind of things were you looking at the time in terms of other artists?
I was looking at the better artists in school.
Right.
Andy Polk was probably the best guy there, and I remember his very first litho was just incredible. He just had a knack for figuring out the etch time, and it's all magic. That is all just voodoo. Howard Payne used to call printmaking the voodoo lessons, because it's just such a weird thing to be good at, and understand why you're good at it, because you gum the stone, and it depends on how hard you press onto the stone with the crayon, and what number crayon you're using, and Andy just always had that. He just had that knack for knowing how to etch it and how long to etch it, and he still is one of the best lithographers in the world. He's doing these incredible realistic drawings now. He was an abstract painter for a long time. He taught. He became the head of the art department at Arizona. But he was an abstract painter, and then he switched over. He always did prints, and he started doing these watercolors of birds and stuff that were just super realistic and super good. He's just a talented, incredibly talented person. So now he's doing these lithos. He retired from teaching, and he and his wife, Catherine Polk, who's also one of the best lithographers in the world, I think. They have a studio they built a little house and studio outside Bloomington, Indiana, and they have this great litho studio, and they just do amazing work, both of them.
Now, what kind of things were you making at the time?
You know, I was kind of all over the place. I was dabbling with, I always drew a lot, but I was, dabbling around with abstraction. And I still have my very first abstract painting, oil painting, in my kitchen. And I still like it.
Well, tell me about it.
Well, it's hard I can't really describe it visually. It's just a lot of staining, a lot of pouring, some brush stroking, stuff like that. It's not a great painting, but it's still good enough to put in my kitchen,
Now, what class? Oh, I mean, that was in painting. Who was teaching painting at the time?
Dick Knowles.
Okay.
And who else was there? Dick Knowles was the main painting teacher. Mm-hmm. Charles Allgood, you remember him? I don't know if you remember him or not. Mm-hmm. He taught watercolor. He taught a watercolor class, my first watercolor class, and where we actually had to stretch the paper and do it right, And I really took to that. I thought that was pretty cool. So I got in a whole watercolor craze for a long time. And but yeah, it's just a matter of having, it's a combination of having close friends that you respect and know are good, better than you, and so even the ones that are not quite you think are good as you learn something from everybody. And so I really, I credit the student body that was there at the time as much as the teachers. But the teachers were good. Langdon was a credible draftsman and incredibly, derogatory sometimes. But, he was a great teacher in his own way. I got to be really close friends with him. Mm-hmm. And, we had a good group of teachers and just such a close-knit, tight little community of people.
And what were the classes that you had with Steve?
I had advanced drawing and what else? I think that's it. I think I took two advanced drawing classes with him. Mm-hmm. There was a few options you had as a junior and senior where you could basically sit in any class you wanted to. Mm-hmm. And even if it was called something else, you could do what you wanted,
Right.
And so Langdon and Ziembo, Daniel Ziembo, he's still painting. I Googled him a year ago or so and emailed him, but I never heard back from him. He's doing these really super realistic landscape paintings. I'm not crazy about them, but I know in person they're probably really good because he was good.
Now, what do you remember about Steve as a teacher? I mean, for me, one of my great sadnesses is that I just had him for drawing one, and I was an idiot at the time, and I had no idea. I do know what he did for me, but I did not have the wherewithal to think to myself that I need to hang out with this person more and do more with this person. What were some things that you remember about his teaching or his person?
We got to be, I took his class and I liked him. I knew he was sarcastic as hell. Mm-hmm. He was very biting sometimes. And but we also worked in the summer. We also worked at this fireworks stand. I have this story about selling Elvis Presley $600 worth of fireworks.
When was this?
Oh, I was 18, so. It was a year or so. I don't know. He died. When did he die? 70.
77.
Yeah. So it must have been 76 or something like that.
Yeah.
And there was an art student, Dale Wilson, whose father owned Wilson's Bait Shop on State Line Road.
Okay.
And we fished. We were all fishermen, too. That's the other thing. Lane and I used to go crappie fishing.
And when you were in school?
Yeah. We'd go down to Moon Lake and sit on the pier. They had this big pier out over the lake. It was about 20 feet down in the water. We'd sit out there. We'd get there about 10 o'clock at night, and we'd crappie fish, sit there with our cooler and beer, and crappie fish with all these black women. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd head to the arcade restaurant and have breakfast because it was still open 24 hours back then. And so, it was beyond the art school. We had this fishing thing because we worked at the bait shop during the summer. And it was just, that whole working at the bait shop was just a incredible, crazy experience.
Now, you mean you were working at the bait shop by yourself, or you were working there with Langdon?
Langdon would work there on weekends, mostly.
And what was, I mean, I don't...
During the summer.
Okay. I think I've only been in one bait shop, and it was like for dumb art stuff. Like I just wanted to have some worms.
Right.
But what...
This was a real bait shop. We had crickets. We had worms. We had, we sold lures, but nobody used lures, And we sold rods and reels. And we had a big black women clientele because they loved to fish. And I'd sit out there on Saturdays. I'd sit out in the back. We had like a big picnic table. We had a ton of bamboo poles. And I'd sit out there and rig poles, tie on the string at the top. You had to do a certain knot. And then we'd put on a bobber, tie on a hook, wrap it around, stag it in the stand. We'd sold hundreds of them. And it was just constantly out there rigging up fishing poles. And these mostly ladies would come in and buy a pole, buy some worms. They didn't buy the crickets very much. They didn't like the crickets. When you open the cricket box and reach in there, they'd jump out all. There was crickets running all over the place. And so, yeah, it was, it's just it was a very weird experience. That and the same Dale Wilson, his father, owned the bait shop. And then every year, every July, he'd have a fireworks stand next to it. Or further down, right across state line, because Memphis, then you couldn't buy them in Memphis. So right across state line is where he lived. And the bait shop was on 3rd Street, but way close to the state line. Mm-hmm. And so the bait shop was in Tennessee. The fireworks stand was right across the line, like 20 feet across the line.
Wow. Now, what? So you were talking.
All of us that worked at the bait shop worked the fireworks stand for the 2 weeks or so that it was open.
Now, when you would go fishing with Steve until all hours of the night, what was he like? I mean, I only knew him, as a teacher.
Yeah, he was just sarcastic as he could be, but funny. He had an incredible sense of humor, and. He just, I don't know how, I never really pictured him as a fisherman. I kind of fished my whole life. When I was a kid, we always go to this lake to fish at. And so, when I found out he liked to fish, and I said, where do you fish around here, He's like, oh, down Mississippi, Horn Lake, or Moon Lake. And we go to Horn Lake sometimes too, or North Lake, which is now, all those places were privatized and closed, gated communities now with big houses all around the lakes. Mm-hmm. But back then it was wide open. You just pull up and drop your boat in,
Now, would you guys? I mean, this is totally fascinating for me. So, excuse me if I'm asking too many questions about this, but. So, what would you guys talk about? Would you talk about art? Would you talk about music? Would you talk about politics? I mean, and I know people don't.
We don't really talk about art too much. we just, I don't know what we talked about. We just talked about fishing. We never really got it. I don't remember any big, heavy conversations about anything. You know?
I mean, I know.
We talked about other students and other teachers, you know.
Right.
And which was probably improper for him to do to me as a student.
Right,
Talking about bitch about the other teachers, you know. But you know, it was just we just got to be friends, and I hung out at his house. I went to dinner at his house when Francis was still alive, and it's just we were just close for a long time.
Now, what was his place like?
His house?
Yeah.
Oh, he had this beautiful house on what's the name of that street over there in Midtown on Forest, I think. Corner of Forest and was it Avalon? I can picture it, but I can't remember the street names. But just a kind of a mid-century nice house, and I helped him redo his whole kitchen floor. And all that kind of stuff. I mean, we were good friends.
Yeah.
Me and a couple other students were, you know, he'd kind of round us up, and we replaced his whole kitchen floor one weekend. So we hung out a lot. He could, you know, he could be pretty ornery sometimes, but he had a really wry sense of humor, you know, a very sarcastic sense of humor.
Well, I remember him being really funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely remember sort of seeing in him a kindred sarcasm.
Yeah.
And
he had a really quick sense of humor.
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
really fast to comment on something.
Right.
And
And then you also had, and Dick was one of your teachers as well.
yeah, I didn't know him very well other than class. I never hung out with him.
Yeah.
He lived out east somewhere, and he didn't really associate with the students much, as far as I know.
He was sort of out there in the country. I mean, I don't know if he was at that same place, but he was at that.
He was out. I never went to his place. I never knew where he lived. I just knew it was out east somewhere.
Yeah, I think I had only been there maybe to pick up a letter of recommendation or something like that at some point, and that was how I saw it. And
well, I think also that I don't think Knowles and Langdon got along too good personally. You know? I don't know why, but I just, you know, I never saw them hang out together.
Right.
You know.
And who else was? Well, I mean, okay, there's a lot of stuff in there. So, at the time, what kind of were you seeing things that Steve was making?
Yeah, he didn't make too much. He painted some at home. He drew a lot. Mm-hmm. He drew constantly. He was just always doodling stuff. And I remember we did a piece together for there was a show when the new University Museum opened. Mm-hmm. Their very first show, I think, was a big group show. And I was in grad school at the time, or just out of grad school, and they asked me to be in it, and he was in it, and he asked me to come over and help finish his piece because he's behind schedule. And I'm like, well, what is it? He says, a drawing. I said, well, I don't draw like you, you know. It's not gonna look. I made it look just like. He took the pen literally. He said, "Here's what you do first." It was a blocked off thing of squares.
Yeah.
And all the squares were drawn slightly different, a little bit different, but in the same phase. It was like a grid of squares about this big, with small dots in the circle, if I remember right, that were shaded from different angles. It's a complicated thing. And I'd sit there and look at the square he did and look at the, because he was just out of time. And he just kind of worked on it. He would work on this side and I'd work on this side and I'd look over and I'm trying to draw like him. It was crazy. And we were laughing the whole time. But we got it done. And I did a 6 by 8 foot woodcut on four or three, actually three by eight, 2 by 8 panels, three of them, are birch plywood. And so it was 6 feet across. It was 2 by 8. There was 3 across and 8 feet tall. And it was a kind of that hokusai, the woman with the octopus.
Okay.
The octopus is basically, having oral sex with the woman. So I did that 6 feet by 8 feet. And I carved the whole thing by hand in my little studio in my house I was living in when I was married. And I had just gotten married. And I printed it with a spoon. I'd roll out this 8-foot long roll of paper and then spoon, because I didn't have a press or anything. It took me all night to print that thing. But it turned out pretty good.
And so you were talking about hokusai. What were some other things that you were interested in terms of thinking about art? You mentioned the first abstract painting.
Yeah.
How would you describe
I drew realistic stuff out of context, putting things together. But, that got to be more and more abstract, And it's not really a thing, it's just like shapes, but like a ball that looked round, shaded to look round, realistically, as a ball, put together with flat squares that had no dimension to them. That's how I started transition into abstraction. Mm-hmm. But back then, it was still drawing a lot.
Now, you mentioned Andy Polk. Were there some other people who were there at the university with you that were particularly important? You were talking about the importance of that core group of people.
Yeah, there weren't too many people that we were real close with. A guy named Brian Wells, he was an incredible printmaker too. He drew, and I don't remember him painting much. I don't know if you ever saw. I don't remember if I ever even saw a painting of his. But he was always in the printmaking room. He was a litho nut, And he drew exactly like was that German guy Hans Bellmer?
Okay.
That did all the twisted body parts and all that. Mm-hmm. That's what Brian Wells mostly did. I mean, they look like, everybody said, oh, Hans Bellmer. And he'd say, it's not Hans Bellmer. But he did. That's the kind of stuff he did. And they were good. They were really good. And he just did it constantly. There was always a Brian Wells. And everybody was looking at it like, what is this? What is this perverted stuff?
Now, what kind of things were happening in the city then? Were there shows? Were there spaces to go to see art in the city then?
Well, I can't remember too much as far as galleries or anything. I think Alice Bingham had a gallery then, but I don't remember her going to it during college. Mm-hmm. And the museum was there, but without a car, I lived and walk everywhere I went. I had to walk, so mm-hmm. I lived out close to the university for a while, and I eventually moved to Midtown, and got to do more things, but it was kind of without any way to get around. It was kind of limited, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I just mostly hung out at school.
Right. And then thinking about that, so when you were at University of Memphis, or Memphis State at the time, and then also thinking about the art department, how would you describe that experience in terms of, like you talked about the importance of it with your core group of friends, but I'm curious, was there a connection to the city as well, or was there a sense that there were things that were happening connected to the university, but beyond the walls of the university, or was it mostly just there in the buildings?
It was mostly there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There wasn't much, like I say, I never really visited people at their houses or stuff because I didn't really have any transportation for a good while.
Right.
And then when I finally did, I'd see them all day at school, so I don't need to go see them at night. I didn't really hang out with too many people then.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there any other teachers that were particularly important at the U of M at the time?
Not really to me. I remember it was the guy that taught sculpture was his name. He and I didn't get along. The first piece of sculpture I did was I took 3 big pieces of sheet aluminum. I had finally gotten a pickup truck at that time, so I got these sheets of aluminum, and Langdon and I were out one day shooting shotguns, and so I shot these pieces of metal and kind of formed this figure with this blasted out gown on. I thought it was pretty good, actually. And then I hand cut this kind of a abstract figure of a woman on the part that wasn't shot to blast it all and bent and everything. And then I cut out and pasted and put them all together. So it was, a pretty big piece. And that was my sculpture final, And the teacher just looked at it and, what the hell? He just really didn't like it at all. And I was, of course, insulted, and I thought I knew everything. And I said, well, I like it. And I think he gave me a B- or something. It was really an insult, And,
now wait, you were out shooting shotguns with Steve? What were you doing?
Well, we'd go out and just shoot rifles once in a while. We'd go out and sit on a bank. I think for him, he was getting out of the house. And for me, I was, he said, you want to go shoot rifles? I said, I've got an old .22 rifle. That's all I got. And he said, that's good. That's all I'm going to shoot. I said, well, what are we going to shoot at? He said, I don't know. You just got to shoot. I said, okay. So we would sit out on this lake and we'd just shoot at rocks and, stuff. Drink beer and shoot rifles.
Now, were there any artists? I mean, you mentioned Annie Polk, but like art, like outside of school, were there any artists that were particularly important for you when you were in college?
No, nobody locally.
Well, what about in the world?
Oh, I was a Jim Dine fan.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was it about Jim Dine?
His drawings. Mm-hmm. I thought he was a great draftsman. I think he is a great draftsman. And I liked all those tool drawings. I liked his aggressive, and he was a great printmaker too. Mm-hmm. And so he was an influence. I saw a couple of his things, I think, at the Brooks one time at a traveling show. So somewhere, maybe it might have been St. Louis when I went home one weekend or something. But I did see some of his real work in person. Mm-hmm. I thought it was pretty strong, mostly the drawings. Mm-hmm. I never cared for the paintings much. Mm-hmm. But
now, how would you see him? Would you see him in magazines? Would you see him in books?
I'd see him in books,
yeah,
mostly. And I did see a couple prints, etchings that were really strong in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. But he was sort of an influence, just as a I just liked the way he attacked when he drew, Mm-hmm. And actually, when I went to grad school in Arizona State, he did a printmaking workshop there, but I didn't get to go because I wasn't in printmaking. Mm-hmm. Arizona State was a just total disaster. I was married, and we weren't getting along so good. And we lived in this awful part of Phoenix that was just the Indian gangs and the redneck gangs would fight on our. We lived on the corner of these two streets, and they'd fight in our yard. Have these rumbles and beat the shit out of each other, and we'd have to stay in the house until they were gone. It's kind of a nightmare.
Now, how long was it between undergrad and grad?
It was not too long, maybe a year out of undergrad. I worked for a while, and then I thought, I gotta get back in art school. This is, I'm not gonna end up doing anything if I don't.
Did you stay in Memphis for that year, or did you go back to St. Louis?
Or? No, we lived in Memphis, and then I decided, well, I started applying for grad schools. I got accepted to Arizona State and Wake Forest and Carbondale, Illinois, and I thought, let's go to Arizona. Let's drive out there and see it.
Right.
So we packed up the car and drove out there, and I talked to the people. I'd gotten accepted. So I thought, let's go out there and just see before we decide to go to Carbondale. Which, I know what Carbondale looks like. It looks just like St. Louis, And Arizona sounded great. So we drove out there, and, man, the desert's incredible. Let's go out here, So I decided to go there, and it was terrible.
Now, you were saying that that you weren't in printmaking. What were you in?
Well, in grad school, I got accepted as I just got accepted. I didn't really tell me what to do, except you couldn't take printmaking, even as a grad student, the first semester for some reason. But the printmaking room wasn't all that big then. And so I'm like, so I get there, and I didn't know that until I got there. I'm like, well, I'm a printmaker, So I really never even got to hang out there. And the painting, when we went out there, to interview, after I gotten accepted, we went out there to see if we could find a place to live, and so I talked to the guy there that was on the committee that accepted me, and he says, "Oh, we get you a studio and everything." And we went out there in the early summer before the fall semester started, and so he said, "I'll get you a set." So when we get there, and I go for the first day, "Where's my studio?" "Oh, you didn't get one. We don't have enough. We don't have enough studios. So you're gonna have to paint from home or something." And I'm like, we'd already moved. We'd already rented a house, and I had there was a little wooden garage in the back with a dirt floor in the back of the house. And that's why I set up as a studio. It's about 120 degrees outside constantly. 150 in that little garage. And I remember the first night I went in there to paint at night. I turned this light on. I had one fluorescent light hanging from the ceiling. There were black widow spiders about this big.
Oh my God.
And each corner of the shed with these webs that were like this big. And their webs were like, you could almost put your hand on them and not be able to get them off. The webs were like, and it was just like, what have I done? I remember the very first night out there trying to paint something, I was like, looking at these spiders, and I was just out there, and like, this was a bad decision,
And did you end up staying?
No.
Oh, how long were you there?
I stayed 2 semesters, and we ended up we had our painting critiques at my house, because I had a backyard patio next to that studio. We had a concrete patio, and there was a teacher he was a black guy, one of 3 in Arizona. What was his name? He was good. He was a pretty good draftsman, but he was sort of my advisor guy. So we did critiques at my house with about 10 of us that didn't have studios. The school had way overbooked their grad program just to get that money, you know. Mm-hmm. And so there was 10 students that didn't have studios at school. So we never went to school. I mean, I had a couple classes I had to go to. I scheduled all those in the same day, in the same afternoon, so I didn't have to keep driving. We lived pretty far from this campus. It was just a mess. The whole thing, the whole experience was just a non-graduate school experience for me. And I did all right grade-wise, but I don't know why nobody ever saw me, you know. I got an A in painting, of course, because we did all the critiques at my house.
That's so strange.
It was terrible. It was just the worst experience. So unlike what Memphis was, undergrad school was like.
Right.
You know, it was just a total disaster.
And so, how did you eventually pull the cord and leave?
On top of all that, my wife and I weren't getting along so great either. She was working at some nightclub or something. It was just not easy to live there, you know. The only good thing about it was that I would take my pickup truck and I'd drive way out in the desert and I'd just sit there for hours, you know, and meditate. And the desert was beautiful. But, you know, I spent all my time thinking this was a big mistake. You know, shouldn't have done this. My grades are okay, but nobody ever saw anything I did. It didn't interact. We interacted on our patio at critiques. And that one teacher, his name was Robinson, big, tall, black guy. He was a pretty good artist, and he was out of place, too. I mean, I think he had the same attitude about his job that most of the students had about being there. Like, this place sucks, you know. But
so now, where did you end up going after that?
We came back to Memphis.
Okay.
And I finished the last year of grad school at Memphis.
Okay. At MCA, or was it okay?
No,
at U of M.
U of M. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how had the program changed in those 2 years?
You know, they had just started their grad program. The year I left, they had started it, and that's really one of the reasons we didn't go there, because I didn't know if they were going to have one. But they did, and Langdon was a big part of it, and so of course they accepted me because they needed students, you know, and they knew who I was. Hell yeah, come on back, you know, and so they, you know, gave me a little bit of some money to come back, and so yeah, I said, let's just move back to Memphis. I'll finish up, and then that'll be it for graduate school, and probably our marriage too. But we stayed married a couple more years, but not too many. But yeah, the whole Arizona experience, other than the time I got to spend alone in the desert, it was just a mess. It's worthless. It was kind of a waste of 2 years, basically, or a year and a half.
And then when you came back to the U of M, were there other teachers who were new to the school, or was it sort of the same crew?
It was Wayne Simpkins was now the printmaking teacher.
Okay. So this was Wayne's first year?
Yeah, I think it was his first year.
Okay. And then what was that his first year teaching? Or had he been a teacher before?
I think he'd come from somewhere else. You know. He was young, but he wasn't. I don't think he was that young.
And then was that a good working relationship?
Yeah, he was good, and he was really knowledgeable about printmaking, so that part was good. It wasn't as dynamic as it was from undergrad days, but it's still 1,000,000% better than Arizona was.
Right.
Just you know, I never really. I went to the art department in Arizona maybe once a week, you know, and there was nothing to do there. I had one class, art history class that I had to go to, and then I had a couple, you know, had a couple outside of the art department classes. I don't know why. a history class or something, and it was just a big waste of time, which is unfortunate, because
Yeah, it's horrible.
yeah, it was terrible.
Now, when you came back to the U of M for grad school, were there some other people there that were a part of your cohort? Like in terms of students?
Yeah, there were a few. A couple of the same people that had decided to go to grad school there after they started their grad program that were in undergraduate.
Okay.
But I didn't know too many, and again, it was kind of like I worked at home. I did have a painting studio, and I, hung out in the printmaking room because they let me. I wasn't even taking a class. I was just, doing printmaking. But I think I did take one official class. But a lot of the work I did for my graduate show, which was in painting basically, was brands.
Now, what kind of things were you making at the time? What were some things that were in your practice?
I had moved to abstraction, after I got back from Arizona. I had moved out there. I got into abstraction, and so it was, I didn't really know what I was doing, but some of it was good, some of it was not so good. But it was as good as anything was being done there.
No, can you describe some of it?
I did. I can't really describe too much in detail because I don't really know what I was doing. I would do a lot of grid stuff, and then I would fill in these grids with sort of like abstract ink stains and stuff, and then the next grid it'd be straight lines going across. It's just all over the place.
But you were thinking about, for me, even the most abstract pieces of yours have still been sort of rooted in landscape.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like the desert really was particularly impactful.
Yeah, it was.
And so, obviously you're also making, when you were in grad school, you made that huge shift in terms of landscape from the Mid-South to,
right.
To
trees.
To yeah, exactly. to no trees.
Verticals. There were no verticals in Arizona.
Right.
Unless you climbed up on a rock mesa and looked straight down.
Right.
When I got back, Langdon had a huge oak tree in his front yard. And the first thing I did when I got back is drive down the forest and look at that tree. I just said, man, think about being in a place that has no trees.
Right.
The one tree that we had in Arizona was in our backyard. And it was an elm tree. The only one that didn't die of a Dutch elm disease.
Right.
For some reason.
Right.
And this beautiful elm tree in the middle of Phoenix. It was just, people would drive down our street just to see this tree. There were just no big trees in Phoenix. And I remember one day, right after we moved in Phoenix, I went out in the backyard where the patio was, and we had a little bit of grass area, and was all flooded with water. And it was just a little, joined our neighbor. Their yard was about a foot higher for some reason, and they had green grass, and all this water was coming over from their yard into our yard. And so I just thought that, he'd overwatered or something. So I dug a little stream there and let the water flow in our yard. Totally helpless, or unaware. And that afternoon, that guy got home from work. He came storming over. You're stealing my water. You're stealing my water. I'm kind of like, what? I'm not stealing your water. Your yard was flooding, so I dug a little ditch. I pay for that water. Turns out, in Phoenix, you have to pay to irrigate your yard. Every street has an option. Every house on the street has an option. And it's like $50 a month or something. I don't know what it was. But yeah, so I was stealing his water. I had no idea. I was thinking, I'm from Memphis. We don't pay for water. We have water because it rains.
And so when you came back, you were working on these abstractions.
Yeah,
And,
in Phoenix, out in my backyard on my patio, I was, being a fireworks employee, I had a bunch of fireworks. So I would put, firecrackers out on pieces of paper, and I'd put a little, one was just a little, like, finger bowl of ink or something, and I'd set a firecracker in it and set it there, and then I'd get them all set up, and I'd go around with a punk and light them all. Bam, 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 bam. Do all these ink, blow this ink everywhere, and blow a hole in the paper. I did a bunch of those. It was all just kind of, I had a pinball machine that I'd had for years, that Langdon and I, and a guy named Vincent Wren. I don't know if you didn't know Vincent.
Well, I mean, I remember him in his work.
He was anyway, I don't know how it happened, but we were driving around one day, the three of us. Or no, Langdon and I were driving around. We ran into Vincent, and he said, there's these 3 pinball machines on the sidewalk this guy has thrown out of his house. And for some reason, Langdon and I were big into pinball machines, even though we didn't have any. We didn't ever play them. We just liked them. So we drove over there in Langdon's truck, and there was 3 pinball machines sitting out there on the sidewalk. And so we loaded them up into the truck. And then we get in the truck, we're driving back. And of course, now it comes to who gets which one.
Right.
And so it turned out that, well, Vincent found them, so he gets first pick. Langdon drove, so he got second pick. And I got what was left. So we dropped Vincent's off and took Langdon's over to took mine over to my place and took Langdon's over to his house. Mine was the only one that worked. The day I plugged it in, it just came right on. Langdon's didn't. Vincent's never did. We got Langdon's working a little bit, but mine just worked. And so I carried that thing to Arizona, because I was renting a house from Langdon, I was renting a house that Langdon had lived in.
Okay.
When he bought his house on Forest, I took his house that they were renting.
Okay.
And so I had the pinball machine there. So we hauled in our U-Haul truck to Arizona with the pinball machine. And I'd cut out these pieces of paper the size of the bed of the pinball machine and cut out the holes where the bumpers were and all that. And I'd lay them in there. And then I inked up the balls with pen raking ink and put the blue ball in there and played a game, And it would roll down this paper and get bumped here, and there'd be a little splatter there and a splatter here. And I've still got them. They're kind of interesting. They're, pinball size.
Yeah.
Like that big. There's 5 of them. So that was that semester in my final entry for my grad school. That black guy, I think his name was Robinson. He loved them. Everybody else was like, what the fuck? And they didn't know what finally I had explained to them how I did it, because I didn't want to tell them how I did it. To me, it was obvious, there's circles there, and, what else could it be?
Right.
But they're just like, what's the inspiration for this? And I'm like, I really don't want to say. Of course, Robinson, he just looked and he said, so you like pinball machines? I said, I've got a pinball machine. And so I told them how it was, how'd you do it? And I told them, they were like, oh, wow, that's great. I said, no, the way I did it is not the great thing. The great thing is it turned out like that, So that's kind of what I was doing. I was blowing things up, and a lot of chance-oriented
Right.
stuff.
And so you're there at U of M, and you're there for a year?
Yeah, it took a year to finish.
Okay. And then what happens after that?
Well, then I had got a job as a draftsman at this drafting place where this guy took these projects and he just had a drafting shop. We just drew what people sent us to draw up, like a design for a toaster oven or design for sometimes houses and sometimes but mostly tools or appliances or something. And we would draw the stuff out as mechanical drawings for manufacturing. It was a really kind of a bogus job. I don't know how this guy was making a living. But another guy that worked there I met named Mike Weeks. And he was connected with the Metals Museum, which had just opened, or that's close to just opened. And they had the whole blacksmithing thing. So he said, man, I said, oh, I think that's cool stuff. I'm a woodworker and, I do all that. He said, well, you should come out there. So I started hanging out at the Metals Museum and got into the blacksmith and I started doing repair days. And so Mike and I decided, sitting there at the drafting tables one day, that why don't we start a business building metal furniture, or building furniture, building metal stuff. And so we found a building and we had a job. One of the people from the Metals Museum that came to repair days asked Mike if he could make these big iron yard stuff. What's it called? We make shapes and
like wrought iron.
Wrought iron.
Yeah.
Wrought iron. They have a name. They're like we did a giraffe. Like a 8-foot tall giraffe topiary.
Oh.
And this lady had these hedges that were all that she said, I can grow anything. I just need a frame to grow this giraffe on. So we made a topiary frame of a giraffe. And then she bought like 2 or 3 more. So we were off and running in our business. And then word got out that we could do topiary frames, so we did a bunch of them. And then we did started making some furniture. We did chandeliers. And designers would bring us stuff to repair, the metal stuff. So we started doing that. And we started building chandeliers. And
okay, hang on. We got to back up just a little tiny bit. Okay, so you thought of yourself as a woodworker. Where were you getting this woodworking experience?
My dad had a wood shop when I was a kid.
Okay.
So
and it was just something that you were kind of always around.
Yeah.
You kind of knew how to do it.
I knew how to use a table saw and a joiner. And,
right.
He didn't have a big wood shop, but I had bought a table saw to build my stretchers, to build my own painting frames. And I bought that when I was in undergrad school. We moved that to Arizona too, and back. I still have it. And so Mike and I started this shop over on Tillman. We rented a little building, and we got broken into one night, and they stole all of our tools. Luckily, his dad was an insurance agent, so he had convinced us to buy insurance, because as soon as he looked at the place, he said, you got to get insurance on your tools, So we did, and they paid for most of our tools. And then we moved to another place in Midtown on Barksdale, and Mike was one of the guys Mike had been working with was this guy named Joe Neerman, who did antique restoration. And he and Mike eventually moved to Maryland to start Neerman Weeks Company, which is still in existence. Joe's dead now, and Mike's retired, but it became a huge company. So when Mike left, I just kept my company there and moved my wood stuff into, and I built custom furniture for a few years.
Now, what was you were talking about being there at the Metal Museum, sort of in the early days of it. That's a huge Memphis institution. What was that like at the time?
Oh, it was great. Jim Wallace was the director, and he they had a nice blacksmith shop, and they had casting, pouring molds. I didn't get into too much of that, but I picked up the blacksmithing. So since I was building furniture, and Mike and I had built metal furniture, when Mike left, I just continued that too, and I built both.
Now, what do you think it was that clicked in terms of your ability to do that? Did that sort of fall into your technical, the things that you liked about printmaking and
and plus my dad was an engineer and had a wood shop his whole life, so he taught me how to use a wood table saw when I was 15 or 14 or 15, and he would always show me his missing finger and said, "This is what you don't do on a table saw," because he cut his finger off on a table saw in college.
Wow.
And so he was always, he taught good table saw ethics. But I was real familiar with tools from him.
And then, so the Metal Museum, I mean, I know how it looks now, but what was it like then at the same location?
It was on the river.
Yeah.
It looked pretty much like they've added to it now, of course. But it was just the one shop. Now they have, I think, two, or an add-on part. But it was nice, They had probably during repair days, I used to go out there and do repair days. And we'd have maybe 10 visiting blacksmiths from around the country would come in. We'd have 10 or 12, people out there fixing everything, fixing worthless garden chairs. But so, you'd say, you can buy one new one for a lot less than it's going to cost to fix this one. But, it's a donation thing, so we'd fix it. But yeah, those were hectic days. Now my daughter is actually doing it. She's a jeweler, and she did her first repair days this year, and it was great. The Metals Museum is a great thing.
Now, you were talking about the atmosphere, the connectedness of the cohorts in the printmaking room. Once you made that shift from, obviously the dreadful experience in Arizona and then coming back to Memphis, were you able to find something like that in your working experience, or was it one of those things where it was like, no, that was really just kind of it?
As far as
like working with people or working around people?
I mean, I was eventually you get out of school, and if you want to do art, you do it at home.
Right.
It's not a community project anymore.
Right.
And,
well, I mean, I remember for me, one of the things that was really hopeful was when I made that shift from after undergraduate was getting the studio of martial arts, and so being able to, it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar.
It's similar to being in grad school, really. Without testing.
Right. And so when you had your shop, what was the shop like? Because you were saying you had the shop on Tillman and then moved to Barksdale, and by then it was just your shop.
Yeah.
And so what kind of things were you doing?
Well, it was just I was doing wood and metal furniture,
okay,
and chandeliers, and I designed a bunch of stuff. I mean, it was all wholesale, and I was in about 9 cities, when it was just me. And so I ended up with I ended up with one employee in Barksdale, and then I bought the building downtown because I needed square footage, and I didn't need 30,000 square feet, but it was for sale and it was cheap, so I bought the building and just used the first floor of a 3-story building, and then I realized, why am I paying rent to live in this apartment? I could build an apartment upstairs, so I had gotten custody of my daughter at that time, and because I'd been divorced, obviously, and but we had a daughter, when we moved back to Memphis, and from Arizona, and I guess she was about 6. We had gotten divorced, but her mother had problems, so I ended up getting custody of her. And so I said, we were living in a tiny little apartment over off of Poplar, and I had the building where I was working in the shop, and I kept going on the 3rd floor. I had these 2 big empty floors, and I was going to build an apartment. Why am I paying rent? I can build a nice apartment up here. So the wiring that was in that building when I bought it, each floor had 1 string of bare light bulbs down the center hanging from the ceiling. Those big glass bare light bulbs. Knob and tube, they called it. And so I had to rewire the whole building. I learned how to do a lot of things. Buy a building, and you learn how to do plumbing, you learn how to do electrical work. My daughter was Lauren was in Catholic school at over on Central. And one of her best friends' dad was an electrician. So I ended up coaching the girls' basketball team at Catholic, and he was sort of the assistant. Neither one of us knew much about basketball, but no other parents volunteered. So and the girls were barely tall enough to hold the ball, but he and I got to be friends, and I was telling him, I'm building this apartment, I got to wire it, and he's like, I can show you how to do all that. So he came over and showed me how to bend conduit, told me how to do it right, how to do it legally, and he said, you can go to the city and take a test, an electrical test, to do your own work in your own house. You can't do that now, but back then you could. And so I went down there. He told me what to study for, and I took the test. And the guy's sitting there, I hand that test in, the code guy's and he's looking at my answers, and he's like, and he said, now this question here about the relative voltage drop from, I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about. I said, well, my understanding is it would be the potential difference between what comes from the line and what comes out of your house. And he's like, okay, close enough. I said, was that all right? He goes, it's close enough. It wasn't anywhere close. And it had nothing to do with safety. It was a theoretical electric thing.
Right.
It wasn't anything that had to do with like grounding. That has to do with safety.
Right.
This was some scientific thing about electricity that electricians don't deal with.
Right. Now, when you were making that shift from grad school to making these things, were you still maintaining a studio practice, or was
No, I wasn't doing much art.
Okay. And so did you feel like
after we built the apartment on the 3rd floor, it took up, a third of the whole floor. Mm-hmm. So I had, 6,000 more feet. So I built a studio, and an etching studio.
Okay.
And I bought a press in 2000, bought an etching press in 2003. And so I had a full printmaking setup there and started doing art again. Mm-hmm. And I'd always done it, but I didn't show anywhere because there was really nowhere to show back then. Mm-hmm. I think Alice Bingham was about it. Mm-hmm. Jay Atkin had a gallery. Mm-hmm. And he was just down the street from me on Main. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him. He said, yeah, bring some stuff by. And he moved out there before I had gotten any painting done. I was mostly doing printmaking. And
now, where was the location on Main?
Mine?
No, Jay's.
He was in the opposite building of mine on the 400 block. He was in 409.
Okay.
On the ground floor.
Okay.
And he had my building had a mezzanine level that was about 12 feet off the ground, about half the floor. And I used mine for storage, but his was really a lot taller because Maine goes slightly downhill toward 409. I'm at 431, so I'm on the high side of the street. I'm at the highest point on Main Street. He was about 6 feet lower drop in Main Street, so his mezzanine was really tall.
Okay, so this was after Cooper, after he was on Cooper Street.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. And then, and so when was it that you bought the building there on Main?
90.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
then
he was there. I think he came in right after I got the building. Can't remember exactly what year it was he opened there.
Okay.
But he had that gallery there for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I'm remembering right, so Jay was there when I was an undergrad. Jay was there, and when I was an undergrad was 89 to 93.
That's about right.
Or so. He was in Cooper young, and then he ended up, I think, maybe coming downtown, maybe when I was in grad school, or maybe after that, because I remember when I was working at Memphis Center for Contemporary Art, it was in the early 90s, I think, and he wasn't there yet. And so when you moved in, or when you were there in 90, was Rob
and Andy were still there.
Okay.
They got divorced, I think, in 92 or 93.
Okay.
Was it that late? I can't remember. Because Terry and Greeley bought the building next door to them.
Right.
From Robert. Robert bought that building on South Main across from me for like $8,000. There's a whole story about that. They bought that building, and then about 2 weeks after they were in there renovating it, he got a call from the BBC, and they said, can we film inside your building? And he said, for what? And they said, well, it's where the thing happened. And he said, what thing? He said, where Martin Luther King was shot from. And Rob said, he was shot from my building. I said, yeah, he was shot from 418. It was your building. So they came in, and because I'd been over there helping him renovate, and on the second floor, in the very back was the bathroom, and the windowsill was gone. And I'd asked Robert, I said, where's the windowsill? What happened to the windowsill? I don't know what happened to it. Somebody tore it out, I guess. So the BBC said, well, the FBI has your windowsill. Yeah, they didn't have any idea that it was the spot.
Wow. And so Rob was down there then, when you were there?
Yeah, he was already there.
Now,
he's the one that he was one trying to help me get a building.
Okay. Now, how did you know Rob?
From school, from university.
Oh, was he a student there?
No, he taught ceramics.
Oh.
Yeah, he was a ceramics teacher.
Okay, now somehow I didn't know that. Now, he's
incredible.
Well, I remember him being
and a painter too.
An amazing ceramicist. I mean, I think by the time I met him, he had sort of become disillusioned with the visual arts, like the making part of it, and I think at some point someone called me at martial arts. They had tracked me down, I think because I had listed Rob on my website, and they said, "Now you worked for Rob McGowan. Is this the same Rob McGowan, that has art in the Smithsonian and the Hirshhorn and all these other museums?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I don't think so," but it was. And so Rob was teaching ceramics. Now, did you interact with him at all as a teacher?
Oh yeah, I wasn't teaching. I was in grad school.
Yeah, but I mean, was he someone
we became really close.
Okay.
And we didn't go out and shoot guns. we got to be pretty close, and I would go to his house and have dinner, and he'd come. I was still married then, and they'd come to our house for dinner. But he and I got to be pretty close, and I had him for ceramics is where I met him, and so I got into got into ceramics. I didn't get into the whole color glazing stuff like he did. He was incredibly good at all that.
Man, those
mine just didn't work that way.
Yeah, his pieces. I mean, I remember. I think I saw some of his pieces somewhere before he passed, and then after he passed, Bert did that show,
Right.
and it was just stunning. It was just a total
incredible.
Yeah. Okay, that's the alarm that went off, and so we'll pause, and maybe next time we can pick up on South Main.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me click the button. And that was the first of 2 interviews that I did with Don Estes. That interview was recorded on November 1st, 2024. Please join us next week when we have the second of 2 interviews that I did with Don Estes. Until then, thank you for listening.